Good morning and welcome to the latest of the Flexible Space Association's Workspace Wisdom webinars. I'm Jane Santin, the Executive Director. We're having a bit of a glitch with my name, but it's definitely Jane, not Zoe. So we're doing this webinar a little differently to others that we've done in this series. We have three panelists who will introduce themselves in a moment. And then we're going to talk about installing podcast studios in flexible workspaces. And this is a topic that's come up quite a lot in recent months, and clearly something that people are either thinking about or have installed recently. So we'll start by introducing everybody and where they are and which business they're at. So if we can start with Katy.
Hi everyone, my name is Katy Tennant. I'm the Director of Operations for UK and EU for Clockwise. Clockwise is a flexible workspace operator. We currently have 18 locations spread regionally across the UK and mainland Europe.
Thank you. And Denise?
Morning all, I'm Denise from Bracken Workspace Plus in Leeds. We only have two sites, so we're quite a small provider, but we've been in the industry since 2008.
And Jordi?
Jordi Morell from Obsidian over in Chester. We're an even smaller provider. We only have a single space. And we've been here for about 20 years and members of FlexSA since before 2000. Prior to that, I was a sound designer at BBC.
Great, thank you. So I thought I'd start off just by showing three photos of podcast studios, just to give us a bit of context. So this first one is at Denise's workspace in Leeds, in Bracken, and she will talk about this in a moment, but this is what she will be talking about. There's a couple of photos there. And then we have Clockwise, and this is in Manchester, isn't it, Katy?
It is, yeah.
So nice bright colours. And then finally, I have included one of Huckletree's, partly because this webinar was sort of inspired by Jordi being at one of our workspace tours in a Huckletree where they had a podcast studio, and that was where I established that he had a lot of audio background and expertise that we would be able to utilise for this webinar. So I shall bring everybody back. So I think if we can start with Denise, which was the first of the pictures. Can you tell us a bit about your experience of installing a podcast studio and what led you to the decision to do this?
Of course, yes. So we actually had a lot of space come vacant in Coles Wharf, our city centre space, and part of it was lower ground floor space, where we've fitted our co-working lounge, our beehive, into that lower ground floor space. We do have a run of windows, but with it being lower ground floor, there was some space in the back that was quite dark, and we didn't really know how to make the most of this space until a podcast studio was sort of suggested by the interior design company, actually, and we were like, gosh, that's a fantastic way of using this, essentially what was dead space. I've sort of seen a bit on LinkedIn and those kinds of, social media streams where people are podcasting these days. And I was like, great, let's provide that facility so our clients and any future clients have got access to that kind of amenity within the building where they can go in and record their own podcasts, their own online content. Now, we are by no means experts in this field. So when we first put the space in there, we didn't provide any equipment. I sort of expected that people would be able to record their own podcasts on their laptops. They just needed the right sort of space in order to be able to do it. But it turns out that wasn't the case. People were using it as a bit of a meeting room. They'd go on and join Zoom calls, webinars, Teams calls, all that sort of stuff. They weren't using it for its intended purpose. So we did some research and we did eventually invest in equipment. So we bought a mixing desk, speakers and microphones. What we haven't done, and I think we probably will need to do, is to install some video recording equipment. because I think just an audio podcast isn't as popular these days as like a video podcast. It's probably even got a different word. I do think that the visual content is just as important as the audio these days.
Yeah, the world of podcasts seems to be evolving quite quickly, doesn't it? And just growing at a rate of knots. So the number of people, well known and just people, everyday people who are starting up podcasts, but video seems to be becoming more prevalent. Katy, can you tell us where, as you said yourself, that Clockwise has a number of locations. Where are the podcast studios, and why were they installed, and how are they now used?
So we have 2 rooms that can be utilised as podcast studios. We have one dedicated podcast studio in our location in Manchester. That was produced at the time of opening in Manchester. So it was a smaller space with no natural light. Obviously, in those kind of spaces, you're quite restricted in terms of how you can utilise that to the best of your ability, and to make sure that the space is utilised as efficiently as possible. So really, that was an ideal location for a podcast studio. We also have one in our location in Bromley. So Bromley is a heritage building, so quite different look and feel to Manchester. Bromley Old Town Hall is quite a monumental building in Bromley itself. It was the location of David Bowie's wedding. Lots of good little anecdotes. It's been used as a filming location for The Crown. And again, we had a kind of long and narrow meeting space in the basement area, which previously, way back when, was actually an old prison cell above the courtroom. So we have also kitted that out, and that is also utilised as a meeting room and as a podcast studio. Both of these spaces are quite limited in terms of no natural light. But at the moment, we, similar to Denise, have installed a kind of base level of equipment. I'd say probably mid-range. We've got 4 Rode microphones in each podcast studio and a mixer, which can interface with both a phone and a laptop as standard. And then if there is a requirement for video, the people that book the podcast studios will bring in their own video kit. But completely echo what Denise has said, there's much more of a transition now towards visual podcasting rather than just audio. So definitely something to consider if you are thinking of creating your own podcast studio.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I visited Clockwise Bromley, and I think it's probably a quite quirky place to be recording a podcast, given its former usage, and the basement, I guess, natural soundproofing as well, and thick walls and prison doors, and
exactly, yeah.
Jordi, so I'm sure people watching this, most of them are not going to have the expertise that you have around audio recording and related matters. What advice would you give them on, if they are going to put equipment in, what do they need to think about? Have you any thoughts on how much they might need to think about spending? Is it something that can be done cost effectively?
Cheers, thank you, Jane. Yeah, I'm just echoing, because the best place to put a podcast studio is in the basement. Except if you're in London, because then you tend to hear the sound of the tubes going past, and it rattles. I remember studios in London that we had where that was the case. We had to stop recording every time a train went past. But apart from that, the soundproofing of it can be very simple, because all you're trying to do for a podcast studio is cut the reflections inside the room. And your biggest soundproofing problem is the doors. I might get into that later. But in terms of equipment, you can do it very, very simply. I mean, I brought a little 2-channel mixer that plugs into your laptop, and you plug proper microphones, and it provides the power for the microphones. No decent microphone works without power. So it's either a USB microphone or something that takes the 48 volts, because that ensures then that only the front of the microphone is actually picking up sound, and not the back of the microphone at all. So microphones start at about £60. The Rode mic, you don't need to go for a Rode. This little thing, I think, cost me £25. It's a high quality microphone. use on instruments or on voice. I've noticed on podcast studios that there's a lot of equipment in there now. Especially those that are going to video. Very big microphones, very big stands that block people's faces. In a broadcast studio, that would never be allowed. But it seems if you're doing a video podcast, you're supposed to have great big cranes of stuff hanging over you all of the time. But you can start very cheaply and get it run, get it soundproofed, stop it reflecting, and then move on as you actually get the demand.
And is there equipment most people will have a laptop, so I'm guessing you don't provide everything, but if you were providing enough equipment just to get people going on a basic podcast that they might not already have, what would you recommend people focusing on?
Just I think as Katy mentioned, a small mixing desk, although that brings its own problems. It's better if they bring their own laptop because it's then recorded onto their own laptop. There's free audio anyway, free recording software, or Audacity, which is free, and it's very high quality. It's multi-track, so you can put each microphone on a separate track, and then just edit the responses you actually want, and you're not they aren't overlapping. Or you can go for a full-blown Pro Tools, a digital editing recording system, which the last time I bought it was something like £2,500 a license. It's now dropped a lot. These were in the very early days when it only ran on a Mac and it wouldn't run on anything else. So the prices have come down. So it's that. But I would encourage them to get your clients to bring their own item to actually record it, not to try and provide a computer and a system that sits on your network. They just come in and plug into the output of the desk, whether it's this sort of thing or it's a small sort of mixing desk.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so that's sort of taking a sensible approach as to what people really need in addition to what they've got. So, Denise, you've referred to that you added equipment. How do you now protect that? And are Bracken staff trained in using this, or how does it work?
We have it. They've all got their own little boxes, and the boxes the kit gets put back in its box and then put back and in one of our secure cupboards. So if a client needs it, when they've booked the room, they'll sort of come and get the kit from reception and then take it downstairs and set it all up. We've labelled everything so it's entirely foolproof, so the on and off switch is I would have thought obvious, but we've labelled it. This plug mic 1 is labelled mic 1. It goes into the socket mic 1. Mic 1 is labelled at the actual microphone end. So try and make it as foolproof as possible, and that helps not only the people that are going to be using the equipment, but your team as well. It's like anything. You've just got to make stuff as simple and as easy to use as possible.
And so it is possible if you don't feel hugely confident on a tech basis, if you feel it's something that everyone could manage with and shouldn't be scared of doing.
Absolutely, yeah. It's clearly labelled, and we've got a set of instructions which are simple to follow, and then it should be foolproof at that point. What's
Clockwise's approach, Katy?
So very similar. Our team are trained on how to use the equipment, and we also have AV support resource if we need it as part of our AV maintenance contract for meeting rooms across the locations. I think from a service level perspective as well, it's really important that our team have a good understanding just to make the experience as seamless as possible for the user and to really support the space being utilised to its full capability. So I think just that basic understanding of how things work and how to troubleshoot is really important.
Yeah. Anything you'd add on that, Jordi? And do you think obviously you've got the expertise on this, but do you think it's possible for the non-experts to be able to use this kind of equipment?
It is, because it can be left in. or checked by your team that everything's been plugged back the way you want it, because some people have come around and re-plugged it and changed it and sort of mess with it. And yeah, as Denise said, labeling everything at both ends. And it was standard practice within broadcasting, where you might have had 100 microphones arriving back at the central point, and you needed to know, otherwise it would be somebody coughing in the background rather than the singer at the front. So yeah, labeling is important. The people I've had into what was my podcast studio, it was an editing recording suite, were people who were from a broadcast background anyway. So they were just sent in and they sorted themselves out. At the moment, it's lying fallow until I can get around to sort of setting it up again.
Okay. So design is becoming increasing focus of flexible workspace, and of course that isn't any different to podcast studios. And I've been into Bracken's beautifully designed one, and also Clockwise. So is this important? And also, are there practical considerations? And perhaps, Jordi, we can come to the practical considerations first. What do people think about practically if you're putting in a podcast?
I think practically, as I think I said earlier, your biggest area of intrusion of sound from outside is the door into it. And you've got two options. One more expensive. You need a double door. You need an air gap between the two doors. So you need to arrange either that it opens two doors at once, they're seen, or there's an outer passage, etc. The cheaper way of keeping outside down is putting a red light on the outside. So when you start recording, you press the button, a red light shines and flashes outside, and because you're in the basement, there's not a lot of traffic, but people know that if go past, they don't start shouting or talking just outside the door. Soundproofing. Inter said you can go to the very expensive sort of clever pads, but you do need to cover all flat surfaces. So if you've not got sound absorbent panels everywhere and just using it to try and tune the room, you still need to put soft furnishings down the walls that aren't actually covered. The one we did here, we put foam. I can't remember where we got the foam, but just that plastic foam stuff, and then just put a nice Hessian cloth in front of it and pinned it to it and provided that. But it's the start. But the design of how it looks then becomes more important if you're going to start using video. Although I thought the easy way of doing it is putting a green screen. You put a green sheet and they do it in front of that, and then they can have whatever background they want on it.
Yeah. Right. Katy, what thoughts did Clockwise put into this area?
Yeah, so I think thinking about visual is much more important now than when we initially opened our spaces, because podcasts are becoming more and more popular and more visual rather than just audio. So definitely thinking about kind of backgrounds now that they're being filmed much more increasingly. I would also just think as well about, and I know we might come to this later in terms of the questions, but your marketing collateral and how you plan to market the spaces, because I think imagery there and descriptions of equipment, if you supply equipment, becomes even more important to encourage bookings and encourage volume. Soundproofing, I think, is a necessity rather than a nice to have, and definitely soundproofing rather than just sound dampening. And then I think other considerations are just around size. So a typical podcast is between two people, but again, you've got more and more kind of panel discussions being recorded now. So larger spaces, potentially multi-use. So I think that's definitely something to consider, because previously it's just been more of a one-on-one conversation, but as podcasts are growing in popularity, it's becoming multiple guests or multiple presenters and one guest. So just having some consideration around what size do you have available. And also natural light, probably not as important as it would be for meeting rooms or office space. So if you do have kind of areas that are restricted in terms of natural light, this is a really good consideration to have of whether that space could be utilised as a podcast studio.
Okay, and Denise, sorry, Jordi, do you want to?
Just on the natural light, that's something you never want to have, because if you're going to edit it, you won't be able to edit because the light will have changed that's on the people, so you can see the edit actually happening. So you need to be able to control the light that's in there.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Denise, what thoughts went in on a design front at Bracken when you put yours in? We
actually put in our desk is like a quite a high level. It's like and people sit like on bar stools, and we consider it active seating. It's not a soft seat that you can slouch and recline in. You have to kind of sit up, and the desk is at quite a high level, and that was intentional so that we could keep the energy up, naturally in when the space was being used, which we did, like I said, on purpose. However, some people might not like that kind of environment. They might prefer to be in a soft seat with the microphone stand coming off a coffee table, if you're nervous about podcasting or being on screen, maybe a softer environment is a better space. But we wanted to create an active space to try keep energy levels up whilst it's being used.
Okay. And what about soundproofing and those sorts of
so we actually need to go back and work on that. It's the soundproofing we put in isn't being as successful as we hoped it was. We used cork panels and then some padded fabric panels, but they're only a few inches high. And the cork panels, I would say, are more an aesthetic feature, rather than something that's actually going to help us absorb sound. So yeah. If you can get sound advice on those kinds of things, if you're considering putting a podcast studio in, I think that's really a really important one to get right.
Yeah, you could see that in the idea that cork would work but in practice it doesn't.
Yeah. The first soundproof studio that I built, and that was as a teenager, was using egg boxes.
Yeah.
Open deck boxes. That's exactly the right shape. It absorbs the sound beautifully.
Not sure you're recommending that now, though.
If you're on a budget and you can still get cardboard egg boxes, just put a cloth in front, and that's it.
Okay, that's definitely a budget tip. So I think people are increasingly thinking about what other amenities they can add into flexible workspaces, perhaps particularly if maybe it's a bit quieter on an office and working front. Are there things that maybe they should be thinking about as to whether they've really got the local market that's going to mean a podcast studio is successful? Are there particular types of industries that if you've got a lot of them in the area, then they're going to be that's therefore going to be a market for you? Katy, have you given Clockwise have installed studios at 2 of the locations? Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, so I think always consider who your target audience will be for utilising the space. And I think that's important with any additional amenities that you put into workspace, really thinking about who and how these spaces are going to be really maximised and utilised to their best potential, whether that's as a added amenity to boost your member experience or as a commercial opportunity for the business to generate revenue. And I would suggest thinking about those and having consideration to those areas before just installing one as standard. So the bookings that we've seen so far are mainly from media, tech, retail, HR, marketing and PR. And we have quite regular bookers of the space as well, mainly from those industries. But I would have an understanding of not just the industries that exist around you, but also currently within the space. If you have a space that's currently operating, think about the industries that you already have in the building and talk to the people around, is this something that would benefit them? How could it be utilised? How can it add value to their workspace experience? And I think another way to kind of boost confidence in that area is by utilising the space for your own podcast, asking the team within the location to showcase the space to the different member businesses that you have in the building. And that could be highlighting their business and the services and products they provide over like a mini podcast as a member highlight, or just to provide some in-house support on how best to utilize the equipment, maybe how to podcast and bring in someone in from that area who has expertise to showcase how to best use podcasting to support the members in your building.
Okay, thank you. Denise, is that on sort of industries in your area, and who's using it?
We've found that it's no one specific industry. There are loads of clients that if you go on to their LinkedIn profiles, their company websites, they might have content on there, which is, it's podcast content, maybe just visual, but generally, maybe just audio, but generally quite visual content. To publicise their own companies and what they do. So I think if anybody's thinking about putting one in, do that. Look at your own client base as a starting point. Do they have any of this content either on their website or on their social media feeds? And then you can learn, if you provide that facility and amenity for them, you become a better space provider for those clients that you've got in your building already.
Okay, thank you. Jordi, any thoughts on who to target?
Yeah, it's, when ours was in use, we had a radio station 2 doors down. They didn't have enough space, so they came in to do recordings there and interviews there. And down the line, people doing contribution and sort of voiceover work. So it's mostly broadcasting professionals. None of my current clients have got anything on social media. It's difficult enough to get them to use the phone, never mind anything cleverer than that, or their insurance and various or lawyers. So that's why it's just actually sitting there until we see an actual demand, and then we'll reiterate. But when we built ours, of course, we recorded everything on tape. So I've got 3/4 inch machines in there for recording. So it's a while since we've gone sort of digital, since Sid actually started out on it.
Okay. So we're sort of heading towards the end. So we'll just say, for anyone watching, if you've got any questions that we haven't covered yet, please put those into the chat box, and we'll try and pick those up in a minute. In terms of the usage of the podcast studios, are external? Is it just internal people? Is it external? And are they being booked like other meeting rooms? Do you have the higher rates because it's a special feature? How does that work? Denise, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, it's the space is bookable just like any of the meeting rooms or the Zoom rooms that we've got on site. It's currently actually still a complimentary facility. We don't ask for any income for anybody using the space because it's very much still in its infancy. It isn't used a great deal, and we don't want to put any barriers to it being used. We want people to come in, we want them to experiment, we want them to have a go. They may not publicise what they do, but they're just sort of familiarising themselves with the space. So currently, we don't charge for it, but yes, it's bookable like any amenity. We do let external people come in and use it as well. We've got somebody coming to record a jingle next week, so that'll be quite interesting. And they're an external client. So yes, it's bookable just like any other of the sort of shared spaces in the building.
Okay, because I guess with podcasts, there's the real potential for it to become regular users. If someone starts a podcast, it becomes successful, they're going to keep coming back and recording the next episode. So
in terms of businesses and their content, we envisage it's only going to grow. People are just going to do more and more of this. In terms of sharing information, their learning, their knowledge, experience, all that sort of stuff within each client's own industry. It's such an easy way to reach a lot of people. It's only going to grow. So whilst it's not used massively at the minute, we're not going to take the space out. We're just going to keep working at it and expect more and more people will be using it in the future.
Okay, and Katy, how are the podcast studios booked by Clockwise? And
so slightly different. We see quite significant usage from externals rather than internals, and the majority of those bookings are booked direct via our website. Our podcast studios are priced in line with our other meeting rooms. So we provide AV in the majority of our meeting rooms across all Clockwise locations. So just as we would with our standard meeting rooms, the AV is included within the price of that meeting room. It's exactly the same for our podcast studios. And the one in Bromley is actually utilised both as a standard meeting room and as a podcast studio, whereas in Manchester it's solely podcast studio, just in terms of the layout and how the space is best worked and utilised.
And perhaps that leads into the question that someone's just posted on what's the best way to market a podcast studio. And Katy, if you're getting external customers, how are they finding out about it? What do you do?
Yeah, so I think we touched on this a little bit earlier on, but I think just having the right imagery of your podcast studios and the right information around what equipment you do provide, so that people aren't having to second guess or add another kind of task to their list to then have to contact you to ask what comes with the room, what doesn't, what do they have to provide. I think that's really important. I would also suggest as a really good kind of low cost tool is your own kind of social media platforms. So we rely a lot on our location teams having presence on LinkedIn and shouting about the great spaces that they operate within. So if you've got examples of podcasts being filmed potentially in those spaces, or you're utilising the spaces internally for your own podcasts, that's a great way to just showcase the space and how it can be used.
Denise, is there anything different that you're doing on a marketing front?
No, there isn't. No, not at all. I would just second what Katy said. And ironically, the one thing I've not done in the podcast studio is record a podcast. I think if we were to use it and put it on our website and have a conversation about what we know best, what better tool? So we'll put that on the to-do list for the new year.
Just say, in terms of, because you were saying that there's more video happening, one of the marketing things you can do is have your studio that has your brand on it. So when it goes out, it then says at the top of it shows Clockwise Podcast Studio or whatever it is that's actually on there, and they've filmed it, and so then you're reaching a much wider range of sort of potential sort of clients.
Yeah, awareness raising of the facility, that's where it is. Yeah. So we've got another question. Do your members edit their own podcast recordings, or do you offer this service? I mean, Jordi, on a practical level, do you think this is something that people could be offering as a service, or is the reality that it's
easy enough that the editing audio and video was very difficult when it was taped, because now it's digital. If you make a mistake, you've got the undo button. I mean, one of the jobs I did at the BBC was train producers to do all of their own editing once we went to the digital, and that saved time. A producer telling an engineer what to actually do. They knew what they wanted, and they tried all sorts of things until it actually worked, and there was support available as well. But these days, I think it's fairly easy to learn. You need to listen to it carefully, what you've actually done, and there are tricks. But I think it should be, if a client is actually asking for recording to be edited, they should be paying twice what they pay for the recording for the cost of editing.
Yeah.
If they're not capable of editing it themselves, then they think it's very difficult. So it becomes a technical thing. So it becomes a high value sort of product.
Yeah, this could be an opportunity. Is this something you've thought about, Denise, or keep
No, absolutely not. No, I think it's my perception would be that it's a specialist skill, and if you need somebody to help you with it, you need to pay for that specialist skill and that resource. It's not something we offer at all. No.
Katy, I'm guessing the same applies.
Same, yeah. No, it isn't something we offer currently. And I think nowadays, like the people that that come in to utilize the space usually have their own capability to edit themselves now. So yeah, that isn't something that we're considering currently either.
Yeah.
I can send you lists of freelance editors in your area. all ex-broadcast engineers. One thing I mentioned, that you don't need a space. If you've got a large empty space, you can actually buy a complete soundproof studio that's completely soundproof. It's built on springs. You've got an outer casing, then the inner studio is actually sitting on springs, completely soundproof. A few years ago, last time I priced it up, but they were sort of £20,000 then to buy, and that was completely kitted out. So you just popped it into an empty warehouse, connected it up to power and to the internet, and you had a broadcast studio.
Right. Yeah. So it's changing. So we had a good question here. Is it a good idea to make the studio available after hours and at weekends? And I can see that podcasts are something perhaps people have got as a hobby rather than their work, that might be something they do want to do. Is that, Katy or Denise, something that you're doing or able to do if the request was made even?
We haven't, but I would say never say never. I think if there was demand there, we would look at that. We haven't experienced any requests for that currently. And our spaces, when they're available to book externally, are set at kind of standard business operating hours. But if anyone ever contacted us directly with that request, or a current member, our members have access to our space 24/7, 7 days a week. So if they wanted to use it out of hours, that would be something that we could provide for them.
Okay. Denise, is that?
Yeah, the same. Our residents will have access to the space 24/7 anyway. So if they wanted to book it and use it out of hours, absolutely fine. You just need to make them aware there's not going to be anybody on site to give them any support if they need it.
Yeah.
But externally, we'd just deal with that. If the inquiry came in, we'd have a conversation about it, and if we can facilitate it, great, and if not.
Okay. So a question that's perhaps a little out of what we've been discussing: what podcast websites are best to market the studio on? And Jordi, is there a kind of network of people that are really into the kind of audio engineering and?
The question was to actually market your podcast. There are various companies. The big one's called Casto, that actually what they do is promote your podcast. You upload your podcast onto, and they actually do the promotion for you to get it sort of out there. So that's the only one that I've actually come across, but there are probably quite a few others.
Yeah, and Katy or Denise, do you know if there are any? I think they're asking about the marketing of the studios. I can see the sort of two linking the things up, the actual podcast and the studios. I can see the theory of this, but do you know if there's any opportunities on that? Or
I'm not aware of any that I've not come across. Podcast office broker podcaststudios.com anywhere yet, so no, I don't think there is. I'm not aware.
No,
there are some lists out there at the moment. So we were looking at one just the other week about kind of top 10 podcast studios in Manchester, or top 10 podcast studios in your local area. So they're just probably good things to have a search for and see, and just have a look what currently exists in your local area. I think it will be quite localized. So it just depends, I guess, in the climate and the market that you operate in.
Yeah. Okay, and then I think this is probably final of these questions. Do users accept that you can never have 100% soundproofing, or is this possible? And does this come up as feedback? I mean, Jordi, perhaps firstly, is it possible to have 100% soundproofing?
Yes, it is possible to have 100% soundproofing. It would be very, very expensive. It'd be suspended. There'd actually be a vacuum between where you are and the outer world, and then fully suspended on sort of springs, so that there isn't any sort of transmission coming through. But in practical ways, yes, it is. And if it is a very loud sound, a small explosion or something, just go back and do it, and do that bit again, and then just cut out the explosion.
Yeah. And Denise, you spoke about having to do further work on this. So is that as a result of feedback, or just your own realization that
both. When you sit in the room and use it yourself, it's obvious. And we didn't do that before a client went in, which was a mistake, So yeah, there's a little piece of advice. Test your space before you let your clients use it.
Yeah.
And the difference, because you've got somebody coming in to do a jingle, haven't you?
Yes.
That'll be music. Now the musical instruments are in different frequencies to the to the voice, and the podcast studio that works for voice won't necessarily work for music, because you'll start having resonances and all sorts of strange sounds will happen. So yeah, have fun with that one.
I'll let you know how it goes.
Katy, anything to add on that? Or?
No, I think just thinking about where the studio is going to be located. So like end of a corridor in a low footfall area is much better than being right next to a kitchen, for example, where you're going to have a high traffic of members or visitors. We're really lucky with the Bromley location because it is in the basement, so it is super soundproof, and we do have a double door. Slightly different in Manchester, but I think with any meeting room, soundproofing, or as much soundproofing as you can achieve, is always going to be important, because the last thing you want is outside noise interrupting your session. So it's just something to consider. I think do as much as you can within reason and that you can afford as a cost to have. But yeah, I think test it as well is really important, just so you have a good understanding of if there are any pain points that you need to be aware of, you can proactively manage those rather than waiting for members to complain about it.
Yeah, be clear on what you're offering.
Yeah.
The consideration we've not talked about, of course, is getting air into this room and doing it silently.
Yes.
Used to be a problem with lights. The old fluorescent lights used to actually hum. We all use LED. Those are nice and silent, but air coming into the room in sufficient volume so that people don't die of asphyxiation.
Yeah. Good to think about that.
It's come in slowly, and then if it's coming in from outside, make sure the vent is somewhere where people don't really walk past, and so don't have the air coming in from the sort of cafe area.
Yeah.
All that sound will then come through that tube.
Yeah, you want it to be soundproof but not airproof.
Yeah.
Okay, well, final question. So perhaps start with Denise, who's installed a podcast studio from scratch. What's the one thing you've learned from your experience with this that surprised you and might be useful for others to know?
Oh my goodness. The one thing that has surprised me, I mean, we're still learning, I suppose. So I don't think I've had any real surprises, because we did it with a very open mind in the first place. So we were there to receive feedback and learn and develop the space as we needed to. I suppose the key thing was we didn't put any kit in. I mean, to start off with, we just thought that's a good use of that space, back of the room, no natural light, all that sort of stuff. And then, it wasn't used for its intended purpose at all at that point. It was just a bit of an overflow space. And we're like, no, we've set this space aside specifically to be a podcast studio. We want it to be used as that. And so that's when we invested in the equipment, so that now that, it's clear that it is to be used as a podcast studio.
Okay, Katy, what would be your thoughts?
Yeah, I think our biggest learning is probably try to retain as much flexibility as possible, because I think what we've learned is how quickly technology changes, how quickly trends change. And even since we've been operating the space, it's gone from being most popular for audio to now becoming more popular for video, and just having the ability to be able to flex to the ongoing changes in demand is really important. So I think if you do have the ability to be able to create a space that is multi-use, that is the best scenario, rather than restricting yourself to kind of one medium. So if you can, try and retain as much flexibility as possible, because that level of soundproofing will be really beneficial for a one-to-one meeting as it would for a podcast studio. So try and retain as much flexibility as you can would be my one biggest learning, I think.
That sounds a really good tip. Yes, being adaptable, because we just never know what the next big thing is going to be. So it's yeah. Okay, Jordi, you've obviously got a huge amount of experience on this, but what would be your sort of one final thing that some people should think about they might not?
What I've been about looking more closely into podcast studios and seeing what people are doing is the fact that they've been designed on the Radio 1 type studios with big DJ mics that they can lean in close to and breathe heavily into or whatever. Popular in local radio. But those sort of big microphones aren't really necessary to actually record. You know, as long as you don't need people to actually lean into the microphone, there's enough gain in the system. You're not, you know, you can stand back. People can sit away, well, as we are from our own microphones now, 3 or 4 foot away. You don't need big sort of. Stamps. It's turned off. I had to turn off the stamp printer so that I could plug in the other camera. So yeah, so. You know, the trend is for the great big road microphones because they were the first ones using USB connectors. But if you're going to proper microphones, you've got a mixing desk. There's a huge range, and get people to just stand back and relax and not have that great big thing in the front of their face where they can't, most of the time, can't actually see the person that they're actually talking to.
No, that sounds good. Good final tip. Well, huge thanks to Jordi, Katy and Denise for sharing your experience and knowledge of this area. For everyone watching, we will make this available as a recording on our YouTube channel via our website. So if there's something you want to check back on, or if you want to share it with colleagues, it'll be there hopefully later today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.